The training hall swallowed sound and light like a cavernous beast. I'm Thorin, an otherwise forgettable cadet at the Interstellar Combat Conservatory, and that Thursday afternoon the hall smelled of ozone, sweat, and the kind of tension that makes your teeth ache. The ceiling arched so high you could park a frigate inside it. The floor was reinforced to the point of being a small fortress. Weapons hung on racks like trophies, and the observation platforms were full of instructors who'd seen too many fights to be surprised by anything, except, perhaps, what was about to happen. At the center of the ring stood Krelth, the Academy's living legend and its worst headache. 7 feet of Vorthan muscle, scales polished to a mirror sheen, forearms folded in a posture that said he expected to dominate. His crest was flared, a cultural signal that meant either mating or menace. In this case, it was menace. Krelth had a record that made administrators look the other way. Dozens of injured cadets, 0 consequences, and a family with enough influence to make rules bend. He treated the conservatory like his personal proving ground. Then there was Jenna Rhee, human, small by interspecies standards, and so unassuming she might as well have been invisible. 5'6", hair tied back in a practical knot, skin pale and unarmored. She'd been at the academy 3 weeks, kept to herself, and moved through drills with a quiet efficiency that made most of us forget she existed. Quiet people are easy targets. Bullies have a radar for them. Krelth's voice rolled across the hall like a boulder. "Hey, human," he boomed, and the room went still. Jenna was at the wait station, setting down a bar that looked laughably light next to what the rest of us used. She turned slowly, expression blank, neither fear nor anger, just a neutral calm that should have been a warning. Krelth swaggered forward, chest puffed, tail swaying like a wrecking ball. "You've been here 3 weeks and haven't sparred. Afraid you'll break?" She answered in a clipped earth accent, quiet and precise. "Not interested." That should have ended it. But Krelth wasn't the kind to accept a refusal. He pointed to the sparring ring and demanded she step in, mocking her species' supposed fragility. The crowd gathered, devices out, bets whispered. Instructor Velos glanced up from his datapad but didn't intervene. Protocol allowed consensual sparring, and the administrators had a habit of letting things play out until someone got hurt. Jenna looked at the ring, then at Krelth, then at the platform where Velos hovered. She sighed once, a tiny sound, and walked to the circle. That was the moment I should have known better. The crowd expected a quick humiliation. Krelth expected an easy win. Nobody expected what came next. Rihook. The first exchange was supposed to be a formality, until Jenna moved like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. Krelth's opening was textbook Vorthan aggression, a 3-step charge, forearm hammer strikes meant to crush and intimidate. For a creature his size, he moved with surprising speed. The mat trembled where his fists landed. Everyone braced for the sound of bones and the sight of a human flattened. Jenna wasn't where he expected her to be. She had slipped aside with a motion so fluid it looked like water, finding the path around a stone. Krelth's blows smashed into empty air, and the mat where she'd stood a heartbeat before. The impact sent a shock through the floor and a ripple of disbelief through the crowd. For a moment, Krelth's eyes widened, an expression I'd never seen on him before. He recovered quickly, pride stung, and lashed out with a tail sweep aimed to decapitate. Jenna ducked under it as if she'd rehearsed the move 1,000 times. She closed the distance, moving inside his reach where his arms were most dangerous. Then, with a precision that made my skin crawl, she struck a narrow gap beneath his chest plates, an anatomical weak point most of us didn't even know existed. Krelth made a sound that was half cough, half animal cry, and staggered. The crowd's chatter died. The betting chips were forgotten. Krelth's crest flared wider, a visual scream of wounded pride. He launched a barrage, 3 arms in coordinated patterns designed to overwhelm. Jenna flowed through them, not with speed alone, but with a kind of anticipatory reading of his telegraphs. She wasn't faster. She was predictive. Each miss was a lesson in his own movement. Krelth's fury turned sloppy. He began to overcommit, leaving openings. Jenna exploited them with surgical strikes, an elbow to a nerve cluster, a palm to the base of the spine, a kick that popped a joint. Each hit didn't just hurt. It neutralized a weapon. His tail went limp. One of his arms twitched uselessly. The champion's technique unraveled into animal desperation. Up on the platform, Velo's hand hovered over the emergency stop. He hesitated. This was technically consensual, technically within rules. But the line between sport and serious injury was evaporating. The emergency light flashed red, but the system needed a manual override. Seconds stretched like hours. Krelf, wounded and humiliated, lashed out with a feral intensity. Jenna's responses shifted from defensive to controlled aggression. She moved with a mechanic's logic, dismantling him piece by piece. Her strikes were not pretty. They were efficient, targeted, and merciless in their economy. She could have ended it at any time. Instead, she held back, applying just enough force to subdue without killing. When Krelf finally hit the mat, the sound was a gunshot in the hall. He tried to rise, crest trembling, but his body betrayed him. Jenna stood over him, breathing steady, hands still taped, expression unreadable. The crowd that had come for spectacle now watched in stunned silence, the kind that follows the collapse of an assumption. The emergency lights blinked red, but the real alarm was the revelation that the quiet human was not what anyone had assumed. The medical drones arrived in a flurry, scanners whirring and stabilization fields blooming like pale flowers. Krelf's vitals were alarming, cracked ribs, a fractured wrist, a concussion that made his breathing wet and wrong. The hover stretcher carried him away under a chorus of urgent beeps. Security sealed the ring, and the hall felt oddly empty despite the crowd still pressed against the railings. Velo stepped down from a platform, mandibles clicking in a rhythm that suggested he was trying to process new data. He turned to Jenna, who had stepped back as instructed, hands visible and palms open. "Explain," he demanded, voice low enough that only those nearby could hear. The question was simple. 3 weeks at the academy, no sparring, no combat drills, then this. What was she hiding? Jenna's face softened for the first time, not with triumph, but with a tired resignation. "I asked him not to," she said. "I meant it." The room held its breath. Velos pressed, and she answered plainly. Former Terran Marine. 8 years. 3 deployments. Close quarters instructor for 2 years. Honorably discharged 6 months ago. The datapads that had once summarized human applicants in a few lines suddenly looked inadequate. We'd all seen the application briefs when the Terran delegation first arrived. Short bios, academic records, a note about prior self-defense training. Most of us assumed that meant weekend courses or civilian classes. We'd assumed humans were soft, inexperienced, and out of their depth. Jenna's words shattered that assumption. Around me, faces shifted. Grex, who'd been so sure of his bet, stared at his forgotten credit chip. Priel's scales paled. The Kaldorian in the back trembled. The Academy's reputation for producing elite warriors suddenly had a glaring blind spot. It had underestimated an entire species' combat experience. Velo's tone changed from accusation to a weary admission. "This will require review," he said. "There will be questions." Security escorted Jenna to a holding area for questioning, but she moved with the posture of someone used to orders and protocols, military bearing, not the nervous shuffle of a guilty student. She answered calmly, cooperated fully, and when asked why she'd come to the academy, she said she wanted to study command and tactics, not to learn how to fight. The administration's dilemma was immediate and political. Krelf was the son of a mining magnate. His family's influence had shielded him before. The Academy's disciplinary machinery had a history of stalling when powerful families were involved. But the footage, every device in the hall had recorded the match, would be hard to spin. The council would have to reconcile precedent with the undeniable fact that a human had bested their champion. As the medical team stabilized Krelf and security processed statements, whispers spread through the student body. The Terran contingent, once a curiosity, became a subject of grudging respect and wary recalibration. Jenna's quiet had been a camouflage. Her competence was a revelation. The Academy's politics were about to collide with a truth no one had expected, and the fallout would reach far beyond the training hall. Word traveled faster than the official channels. By evening, the incident had become the dominant topic in every common room and corridor. Some cadets replayed the footage on private devices, dissecting Jenna's technique frame by frame. Others debated the ethics of Krulfa's provocation and the Academy's delayed response. The administration convened an emergency review board. The Vorthan Embassy made a terse inquiry. The conservatory's reputation, its carefully curated image of impartial excellence, was under pressure. Jenna was placed in a secure interview room, not as a suspect, but as a witness and a person of interest. Velos and a panel of senior instructors asked measured questions about her background, her reasons for enrolling, and the extent of her prior service. She answered each one with the same calm precision she'd shown in the ring. When asked why she hadn't disclosed her full military record more prominently, she shrugged. I included what was required. I didn't think it mattered. I wanted to learn strategy, not prove my combat history. The Terran liaison requested access to her service records. The Academy's legal counsel prepared for diplomatic friction. Krulfa's family demanded an internal investigation into the circumstances that led to their scion's injuries. The conservatory's leadership had to balance fairness, safety, and the political realities of interstellar alliances. Among the student body, reactions varied. Some admired Jenna's restraint, how she had neutralized Krulf without delivering fatal blows. Others resented the humiliation of a champion who had been allowed to act with impunity for too long. A few whispered about the implications. If humans brought battlefield experience to the Academy, what did that mean for training doctrine? Would the curriculum change? Would the Academy's assumptions about physiology and combat have to be rewritten? I found myself replaying the match in my head, not to gloat but to understand. Jenna's movements were not flashy, they were economical. She targeted nerve clusters, joint mechanics, and leverage points with a knowledge that suggested formal training beyond basic self-defense. Her restraint, choosing non-lethal but disabling strikes, spoke of discipline and rules of engagement. She could have ended Krulf permanently. She didn't. That choice complicated how people would interpret her actions. Krulfa's recovery was slow, but steady. The medical reports were blunt: multiple fractures, soft tissue trauma, and a concussion that would require monitored rehabilitation. He would survive, but his aura of invincibility had been punctured. The Vorthan community bristled at the public humiliation, and the Academy braced for fallout. As the review board prepared its preliminary findings, rumors swirled about possible sanctions, about whether Krulfa's family influence would blunt consequences, and whether Jenna would be lauded or penalized. The conservatory's leadership had to decide whether to enforce rules impartially or to bow to pressure. The choice would reveal more about the institution than any sparring match ever could. The board's decision would set a precedent, one that could redefine the Academy's rules and the balance of power among species. The preliminary hearing convened in a glass-walled chamber that overlooked the training complex. Senior instructors, legal advisors, and a representative from the Interstellar Council sat around a table that gleamed under cold lights. The footage from the ring played on a loop, each angle dissected and annotated. Krulfa's family sent a delegate. The Terran liaison attended as well. The atmosphere was taut, like a wire about to snap. Velos presented the facts, the challenge, the sequence of strikes, the emergency stop delay, and the introduction of a weapon by Krulf. The legal counsel emphasized the Academy's code. Consensual sparring is permitted, but weapons are forbidden in unarmed matches. Krulfa's act of grabbing a training blade was a clear violation. Yet precedent had shown that violations by influential cadets often resulted in muted consequences. The council representative leaned forward. "We must consider safety and precedent," she said. "If we allow political influence to dictate discipline, the conservatory's integrity erodes." Her words landed like a gavel. The room shifted. For the first time, the Academy's leadership seemed to weigh principle over pressure. Krulfa's delegate argued mitigation, provocation, cultural differences in combat etiquette, and the champion's prior record of excellence. The Terran liaison spoke in measured tones about Jenna's service record and the need to ensure her safety and fair treatment. The debate was less about the fight and more about what the Academy stood for. Outside the chamber, students watched the outcome with bated breath. Some hoped for a decisive ruling that would curb the excesses of privileged cadets. Others feared that politics would water down any punishment. The conservatory's reputation as a meritocratic institution was at stake. When the board issued its preliminary ruling, it was a compromise that tried to thread a needle. Krelf would face temporary suspension from sparring and mandatory rehabilitation training. His family would be required to fund a safety initiative for the training halls. The academy would review emergency stop protocols and institute stricter enforcement of weapon rules. The ruling acknowledged Krelf's violation while avoiding the harshest penalties that might provoke diplomatic backlash. Students reacted with mixed emotions. Some cheered the accountability. Others grumbled that the punishment was too light. Krelf's pride was wounded, but his family's influence had softened the blow. The ruling signaled a shift, but not a revolution. Jenna returned to her routine with the same quiet focus. She attended debriefings, answered questions, and continued her studies. The incident had changed how others saw her, but she seemed uninterested in accolades. She had come to study command and tactics. The sparring match had been an unwelcome detour. The academy's reforms would ripple through training doctrine, but someone in the shadows was already plotting how to exploit the new rules. Rumors of exploitation spread faster than the official memos. A few cadets whispered about underground matches where rules were bent for profit. Others speculated that rival factions within the academy might use the incident to shift power balances. The conservatory, built on centuries of tradition, was suddenly vulnerable to modern pressures. Politics, money, and the unpredictable variable of a newly integrated species. Jenna kept to herself, but her presence had altered the social calculus. Instructors began to adjust lesson plans, adding modules on cross-species anatomy and unconventional tactics. Some students bristled at the extra work, others embraced it, eager to learn the techniques that had unseated a champion. The curriculum evolved not because of ideology, but because the evidence demanded it. I found myself drawn into conversations I'd once avoided. Cadets who had been complacent now asked hard questions about assumptions, about gravity, physiology, and the limits of traditional forms. The Academy's old manuals, written by species with centuries of dominance, were being annotated with new margins. The conservatory's mission to produce adaptable leaders was being tested in real time. Krelf's recovery continued under close supervision. He trained in modified regimens, focusing on rehabilitation and technique rather than brute force. Pride is a stubborn thing, and he worked to reclaim his status. But the aura of invincibility had been punctured, and that made him dangerous in a different way. Quieter, more calculating. Meanwhile, Jenna's file became a case study. Instructors used the footage to teach students about leverage, nerve clusters, and the ethics of restraint. Her choices, disabling rather than lethal, became a lesson in controlled force. The Terran liaison met with Academy leadership to discuss formal exchanges and curriculum contributions. The human contingent, once a curiosity, was now a resource. Not everyone welcomed the change. Some traditionalists argued that the Academy's identity was being diluted. They feared that accommodating new species tactics would erode the conservatory's heritage. Others countered that adaptability was the essence of survival. The debate was less academic than existential, evolve or ossify. Amid the institutional shifts, personal dynamics shifted too. Friendships formed across species lines. Old rivalries softened. New alliances emerged. The training hall, once a place of rigid hierarchies, became a crucible for unexpected collaboration. For the first time in my tenure, I felt the conservatory living up to its name. Not just a place that preserved techniques, but one that conserved the capacity to change. Yet beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Krelf's supporters whispered about slights. Some cadets resented the attention Jenna received. The Academy's reforms were a balm for some wounds and a provocation for others. The next test would not be a sparring match, but whether the institution could hold together under pressure. As the conservatory adapted, a new threat emerged, one that would test whether reform could survive ambition and resentment. The shadow circuit escalated. A high-stakes match was leaked to a private syndicate, and the venue was a remote training annex outside Academy jurisdiction. Word spread through encrypted channels. The participants were a mix of disgruntled champions, mercenary fighters, and cadets seeking quick credits. The stakes were more than money. They were about status, leverage, and the power to shape outcomes. When the Ombudsman's team traced the leak, they found a tangled web of favors and debts. Some cadets had been coerced, others had volunteered. The syndicate's reach extended into alumni networks and off-world patrons. The Academy's reforms had pushed the problem outward, but they hadn't eliminated it. The leadership realized that to protect the institution's integrity, they needed to act decisively. Velos and the senior instructors coordinated with the Ombudsman and the Interstellar Council to stage a sting. They used the leaked information to set a trap, turning the syndicate's own channels against it. The operation was risky. If it failed, the Academy's reputation would suffer further. If it succeeded, it could dismantle the shadow network and restore some measure of trust. Jenna was asked to consult, not as a combatant, but as an expert witness and trainer for the enforcement team. Her knowledge of close-quarters tactics and restraint made her invaluable. She agreed, not out of a desire for recognition, but because the Academy's future mattered to her. The sting unfolded with surgical precision. The syndicate's operatives were exposed, and several high-profile alumni were implicated. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Krelfa's name surfaced in the investigation, not as a mastermind but as someone who had been approached and had made choices that reflected the old culture. He faced disciplinary action beyond the initial suspension, supervised rehabilitation, public restitution, and a probationary period that would limit his influence. For the first time, the Academy's leadership enforced consequences that could not be easily softened by money or status. The sting's success didn't erase the damage. Trust had been fractured, and some cadets left the conservatory in disgust. But the decisive action also sent a message. The institution would defend its principles. The reforms deepened, oversight strengthened, and the curriculum continued to evolve to include cross-species tactics and ethics. In the months that followed, the training hall felt different. There was still rivalry and ambition, but also a cautious respect. Jenna returned to her studies and to mentoring, not as a celebrity, but as a steady presence. Krelf worked through rehabilitation, his pride tempered by consequence. The Academy had been tested and had changed. As for me, I kept my head down and my mandibles shut mostly. I watched, learned, and tried to be better than the assumptions I'd once made. The incident had been a lesson in humility, politics, and the messy work of reform. It had shown that a single quiet person could upend expectations and force an institution to reckon with itself. The conservatory had survived its crisis, but the galaxy was vast, and new challenges would always test whether change had truly taken root.